Oops, that's not what I meant to press. All right. We're just going to dive right in. This is the Epic Monster Battles design stream. So I don't know if you caught it, but a few weeks ago I made a video about designing epic monster battles that were essentially like those sequences you get in games like God of War or in some big blockbuster movies where a battle with an epic enemy takes place over essentially multiple phases. So that the combat encounter you're having is not just restricted or limited to a single combat where you fight and you either kill the enemy or they kill you or force you to run, but instead has a little bit more complexity and narrative nuance to it, and there are smaller goals to achieve between each phase. And there was a decent reaction to that video. It's an idea that I've had for a while and something that I think a lot about and use in designing a lot of my encounters. So I wanted to take it to the next logical step and show you how I go through the process of designing an epic monster battle and doing that just kind of straight from the start, doing it live. And so here I've jotted down some notes that'll just take us through everything we need to really consider for designing this battle. Obviously, we need an idea for a bad guy. We need to decide whether the reveal of this opponent, of this epic monster or antagonist, is going to be a surprise encounter where the party isn't expecting it, or a long build up to it. And then we're going to have to build out the combat sequence, right? The actual phases of the battle, the miniature encounters that will together form this longer sequential battle, where each encounter is now just one phase in this combat. Within those phases, we're going to have to make sure that each part of the combat is compelling and interesting for the players, that it keeps them on their toes and challenges them not just to do a bunch of damage, but to have a creative approach to solving the problems that they're presented with. And I'm just going to do this so I can hear everything better. And, through the phases, there are elements that are going to shift, right? The player's goals might change. The environment around the players might change. The actual abilities of the monster in question might change. These are all things that were addressed in that initial video. So if you haven't watched it, make sure you go back and watch the Epic Monster Battle video. But yeah, and that's pretty much it, right? These are just elements to keep in mind. There's obviously going to be combat. It's still a battle. There's going to be maybe puzzle elements, maybe some layer actions, skill challenges. I'm not 100% sure. I've tried to think about this as little as possible before starting on this stream so that when we're jumping in, when we're talking now, we can work together. Well, you can at least see. So we're just going to keep going. All right. So, moving back to this. So, for the idea of the bad guy. Now, I had some ideas already, right? Because I was going to give examples during the first video, and I didn't want to give too much. And I tried, like I said, not to think about this, but I had this cool idea I had two separate ideas. One, which was like a volcano, right? Doing something with either a fire djinn or an elemental inside a volcano, I think could be really interesting. The magma gives interesting environmental effects that can change over the course of the battle, and it's fire, which is always cool. So I thought that could be fun. Elementals, I think, make dope enemies too. I also had a separate idea for a dwarven forge. Maybe a shield golem or an iron golem inside a dwarven forge that the players had to combat. And that's a cool environment too, where there's more interactable objects potentially that could contribute to the battle. But both of them seemed a little bit one-dimensional, right? A forge was just a forge. The lava would be just lava and fire. And so I was worried that they wouldn't be necessarily interesting or compelling enough. And so I thought, why not combine the two settings? And it then came to have the idea for the bad guy. And typically that's where it starts, right? Typically there is a certain enemy or a monster that you want to confront your players with. And so you can start to design around that monster. And for me, the idea there was either the golem or the elemental, but I thought about maybe combining them in some way. And I remembered from Warcraft 3, the Fire Lord. Do you guys remember the Fire Lord from Warcraft 3? Yeah. I know he's got a name now in like some of the newer games and stuff. But how cool is this guy? This guy's awesome. And obviously, it's not a statted monster, but for the purposes of this stream, that doesn't really matter. We're not going to go deep into the levels. We're not going to go deep into the stats and health. We're going to really be talking about how do you actually just build this encounter and make it narratively compelling and in-game playfully play the play of it compelling for the people at the table. So Fire Lord is what I'm going to go with, and that's what we're just going to call him. So for our bad guy, let me get my ergonomics all set. All right. For the bad guy, we're going to go with the Fire Lord. And we know that he's this kind of primordial, like fire elemental, right? But that he has a form of some kind. And I think this form could actually be very key because setting-wise, I still want to keep the Dwarven Forge. And so in some of my settings, I've used this concept of dwarves using primordial magics essentially in their forging. It's not an unheard of idea, the idea, the concept that dwarves would have some sort of magic involved in what they forge. But I really like the concept of it. And so this primordial fire, right? This is maybe primordial fire that animates the hearth of the forge. Is that the right term? I don't know. Like I said, at this stage, not a big deal. These are all things that you could fix and take a look at later, get more specific, create like proper terms. But we need to first build the idea in our heads before we worry about cleaning it up anymore. And so the primordial fire that animates the hearth of the forge, this is really the enemy, right? I think this is something, a treasure of a kind, right? The fire itself is, dwarven fire. And the players / characters are trying to capture it, which answers our next question, which is the surprise versus long buildup. They're going to capture this thing. What I'm hoping they're not going to anticipate is that this object, essentially this animate fire, is going to be sentient, right? So I always like having like key design notes, which just keep me in line, make sure that I have the same ideas going for everything or the same through line, so I don't lose track of anything important that's central to communicating and getting the right feeling across for the encounter, for the adventure, whatever the case is. In this case, I like the idea of the surprise, the fire is sentient, right? I think that's great because you can go from this place of having the forge be quiet, right? Be just this intriguing forge that they're looking around, but the hearth is still lit. The fires are still lit. The forge is long gone, maybe. I think if it's a strong dwarven fire and there's no dwarves there, I feel like that's kind of more the direction that I want to go. There's no dwarves, so it's an ancient dwarven forge. It's an ancient dwarven forge, deep underground, because all the best dwarven forges are deep underground, and everything, everything is dusty, and it's clearly been abandoned for a long time. But the hearth is still lit. And that'll be cool. That'll be a weird intrigue. When the players discover it, I think it'll give them a immediate thing to shoot for. And then we can have the surprise of the fire being sentient and have the fire essentially, and here's really where my thought was going, having the fire animate the objects around it. So if there's big armor, like there might have been for a shield golem or an iron golem, like a half-complete shield or iron golem, the primordial fire could then animate that golem, and we could get this sort of Fire Lord feeling. Oh, I wonder what his name is in Overwatch. Fire Lord. Or not Overwatch. Heroes of the Storm, right? Ragnaros. That makes sense. So, I mean, he's a little different here design-wise. But look at this, right? This could kind of, and that's fine, I think, to use reference like this, to use ideas. We're playing for our games, right? So for your home game, use whatever you think is cool. I always loved this hero. This was a super cool classic raid back in the World of Warcraft days as well. So, we take this guy, and here we've got the Fire Elemental, and there's some armor that could be scraps of a shield golem. I think this is an awesome concept to start off of. Now, we're not going to try to be ripping his abilities or things like that, getting into the monster design side. We can worry about that another time, or just see what'll come across narratively as we're building the encounter proper. But I think that's really cool. So key design notes is this, and the fire animates objects and items around the forge to threaten the players. And I really want to keep that interactivity, that was a really weird intonation. I want to keep the interactivity of the forge as a key point, right? I'd love for uh, for the elements of the forge itself to be key to some phase, potentially phases, uh, of the combat sequence. Right, the players need to use the forge to overcome the fire. So there'll be combat, there'll be some other sides, maybe even like quenching objects, things like that. I think that could be really cool, and that gets us started. And so if we're looking here now, we know our bad guy, right? So we have this Fire Lord, which is not really a Fire Lord, right? It's a primordial fire elemental. So we can throw that up here, primordial fire elemental. Well, Fire Lord from Warcraft. Oh, that's not right. Fire Lord from Warcraft 3 as reference. We've got the setting of this Dwarven Forge, and Dwarven Forge, not sponsored by Dwarven Forge, not happening though. This would be an awesome build set for them to have. And then we've got these key design notes, right? We know the fire is sentient. This ancient Dwarven Forge, the fire animates objects and items around the forge to threaten players. Now we need to move into the next bit, which is the combat sequence. So combat sequence, super key. This is where we're really going to get into the meat of how does this actually play out. So first we're going to have the phases of battle. Now I like 3 phases. I think 3 is just classic. So we're going to have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. However, we got to go a little deeper than that. And there's essentially the connections between phases, which is what I wrote. And so now we're gonna have I don't even have a really good term for them. We're gonna have the connection cutscene essentially, which it's interactive, right? It's not meant to be just a closed off. You just talk at the players while it's happening. But we do need to know what this is. So I'm just gonna throw these in here, and maybe that'll give us some ideas. But rather than fill these out yet, I'm just gonna have some ideas. General ideas where I can just list them. First thing that comes to mind, right, is the Fire Lord phase. Fire Lord phase. I definitely want to have a phase where we see the primordial element essentially animates a half-constructed iron or shield golem and takes over the body, wields it against the players. I think that's really cool. I think this is a fun way to do this, to have for this encounter. And for me, it's the core, right? This idea of the Fire Lord is what started the idea before then getting this concept of this primordial elemental. And it's going to be a fun culmination. I love the idea of animated weapons. I think animated weapons are so cool, and such a fun part of D&D and such a cool things for the players. If we can have animated weapons plus they're on fire, that's going to be scary. And, potentially, depending on the level we place this at, having that extra fire damage could still make it challenging for a higher level party. And now it's more either they're targeting the individual weapons, and it might be like minion rules, right? Where 1 hit per weapon or item is enough to destroy it. Or it might just be like a skill challenge where they just have to avoid weapons in waves. I'm not sure. Now, I want to think about other ideas, because here there's only 2 ideas. I'd love to have ideally at least 3, obviously, for each of the phases, but maybe 4 or 5 ideas, so we could mix and match and choose and give ourselves greater selection than what we actually need for the total sequence. So, sensitivity is way too high on this. All right. So what other cool things could we do here? What would be fun? Well, let's try to figure it out. Maybe we could do... we could have just the hearth, right? Like just if there's multiple, if the idea is in this Dwarven Forge, that it's not just one forge. It's not like a master craftsman forge. It's more of a large workshop. Yeah, I think this is cool. Having a large workshop multiple forges would have been multiple master craftsmen, craft dwarves, working down here, definitely. So if this is the case, we can have a kind of hearth phase. I really wonder if that's the right word, hearth phase. Man, gotta ask Gil. Okay, we'll think about that later. Get some actual blacksmith terminology or do some research. Hearth phase, where potentially the fire is jumping from hearth to hearth, and the players need to reduce the amount of forges, need to limit its movement and mobility. This is definitely an environmental phase. I think that can make it exciting. There's also the possibility, maybe, the fire goes out of control. And the primordial elemental strength can actually cause, well, can actually be undoing / breaking the forge. I'm imagining like fissures of fire breaking through the floor that's now old and decrepit, or through pipes, or maybe through, pipes, through pipes in the walls and like ceilings. On the walls? Pipes on the walls, not in the walls. Pipes on the walls and ceilings. And bringing that magma feeling to this environment. Those are 3 fun phases. We could also have like minor fire elementals. That's a total possibility. Almost like sprites, or like mephits. Are there fire magma? Oh, there's the magma mephits, right? Magma mephits. I'm pretty sure that's a thing. Having some kind of fire elementals, minor fire elemental. Oh, were you not able to see it before? Hopefully you can see it now. Magma mephits, something like that, spawned by the strength of the element. This is fun because I think it's important to diversify the relationship the players get to have to the combat. If every combat that they're encountering, or every sequence, every phase in this sequence is always just all the players versus one enemy, it makes everything very simple. Having multiple enemies, or cases in which they need to be in one place versus where they can spread out, keeps the combat dynamic, keeps things moving, and doesn't allow the players to get too used to anything. So spawned by the strengths of the element, we're definitely going to want multiple enemies here, right? That's key. That's a lot of what we're talking about. So just off pure brainstorming, I was able to come up with 4 phases here. And they're not necessarily, each of them alone, I think they're cool. A Fire Lord, animated fire weapons, Hearth phase. Any of them alone would be either an interesting puzzle or an interesting combat encounter. Together, it's the combination of them and the way that they'll play in from one to the next that I think will make them truly epic, and that gives you that satisfying feeling. The key is that we want to consider, I'm going to delete this for now because we have it up above. We want to consider the variables across phases. And I think this might give us either some more brainstorming or a better understanding of how to actually implement and utilize this. So the player goals. What are the player goals? Well, we were saying, ideally, right, that the players are trying to capture this primordial dwarven fire. That's what they're trying to do. So if they're trying to capture the dwarven fire, this actually changes my opinion a little bit, right? When we were looking at the Fire Lord phase, and I was like, oh man, that's a really cool way to end. Could still be true, but this Hearth phase, where the fire is jumping from hearth to hearth, potentially what the players are trying to do there is close the hearths, or ruin them, which is kind of sad, right? Desecrating this dwarven forge, to limit its movement and mobility so that when it's finally only in one, when most of its power has been spent, it is now unable to escape and easily captured. So this could potentially be a good end phase. Because the player goals, if we try to break them down, and we just map out how the goals could evolve throughout the combat sequence. So I'm going to throw this here because we're still in this part. Evolution of... Too low. Evolution of player goals. So we're looking at this. The players want to capture the fire. That's the end goal. By the end of the encounter, either they've successfully captured it, or the fire's killed them all and burned them to death, or it's gotten away or something. But what the players are trying to do is trying to capture the fire. And so we have to make sure that that remains a distinct possibility and that it stays reasonable from a narrative perspective, that this is, achievable. It's a goal within the realm of possibility. First thing they need to do is find the fire, right? They have to find the fire, which this is probably, if this was part of an adventure, making it to the forge. So here this is making it to the forge / maybe investigating the forge. This is when that surprise element of the sentient fire kind of watching them from a distance is going to be important. Oh, and I just thought of something really cool, which we could have here in the key design. The fire is sentient. When combat starts, the fire could light the torches on sconces in the wall. It's sentient, why not? And that's cool. And now we get that fun lighting effect of all the torches lighting at once, but there's kind of agency behind it. There's a real reason that that's happening. It's the will of this sentient fire. So first they need to find the fire. Next, they need to fight the fire. Right? They didn't light it. They tried to fight it. They need to fight the fire. At the beginning, the fire is going to be, well, where would the fire be? You have this primordial sentient fire that's been in this ancient forge that's existed for a long time. And somehow the fire has endured. It's managed to last. So how has it done that? Maybe it's done it through animated armor, right? Maybe it's been able to split itself off. And that could be a cool, interesting angle. So I'm going to add that to the ideas. We're going to do animated armor. These are kind of like our minor elementals, similar to minor elementals. Suits of armor animated by the primordial dwarven fire. Primordial dwarven fire. They're kind of wisps of the fire's core. Not its main body, just elements, just small pieces. And they're being used to keep the fire fed and allow it to grow. I think one statement that we're going to say, this is a powerful dwarven sentient fire. All it wants is to consume and to burn as hot as possible. The fire is sentient. The fire wants to consume and burn as hot as possible. So to consume as much as possible and burn as hot as possible, right? If we ask ourselves, what does fire want? I think in this case, for this dwarven fire, that's a reasonable assumption or end goal. So it's going to find the fire, investigating the forge, and now maybe we're going to have these figures walking through these animated suits of armor that are going to add a little bit more to the dynamic. They could have a fun effect where when destroyed, there's a burst of fire damage, potentially. That's an interesting mechanic that I always like, the kind of exploding symptoms. So find the fire, fight the fire. Really, first they need to stop the fire from growing. Stop the fire from growing more. One of the elements that we talked about in the first video I made on designing epic monster battles is this concept that you could have variable degrees of success. So let me show you the example of how that would work here. I gave a different example with demons and with a demon and several altars here. Here we're going to do things a little differently. We're going to go with either hearths or like wood, maybe not wood, coal deliveries. I think that's interesting. Hearths / coal deliveries. And, who knows what we're going to do. Dark dwarf slaves, things like that. Super interesting. I like that. We could have dark dwarf slaves enslaved to the fire. The fire has gone and It's overturned. Overturned? Overturned its captors. That's not the right term exactly, but yeah. It used to be controlled by them, and now it controls them. Hearth/cold deliveries. The idea, to come back to this, the idea here is that the fire would be raging at the center, right? The fire discovered, raging powerfully already. And it sees enemies coming. And so once it's confirmed the threat, once the fire has confirmed the threat/intent of the adventuring trespassers, which are your players, it's going to command as much coal delivered at the last second as possible. And we could uptick, we could emphasize the importance of this, right? Let's say there are 4 deliveries, right, which are 4 armor suits or slaves coming to deliver a last heaping pile of coal, wagons, we're gonna say, or small wagons, small wagons. What are those called? Where you where you pull like with lawns and stuff, like lawns. Yeah, I don't know, but like those hand wagons, essentially. Is that the right word? Hand wagons of coal that are trying to be delivered in. The more get delivered, the stronger the fire is in future phases, right? And so that's the key variability where the interactivity is important. If the players manage to take out all 4 of these deliveries before they make it to the central hearth, the core of the fire, then the fire is going to be kind of crippled for the next battle. However, if all 4 make it, it's going to be very powerful. And in between, we're going to see what happens there. And so now with the player goals, we're getting a really clear, I think, idea of the narrative sequence of the combat. We just haven't figured out exactly which ideas are going to apply. So find the fire, stop the fire from growing more, and now they need to fight the fire. And that makes perfect sense to me, right? They need to fight the fire and understand, it's strength dependent on result of previous phase. And I don't know what form it is. This might be 2 phases. First phase of battle, second phase of battle, and then the last thing, capture the fire. And I think that makes sense. First, the players, they're coming into this place, they need to find the fire. They see it trying to consume as much as possible, trying to grow. They need to stop the fire from growing more. And we have to figure out how to communicate that. How do we make that clear and make sure that the players understand that this is what they need to do? And who knows, maybe we'll see that that's hard to communicate and we'll find another path. But for now, this makes sense. This is just one degree, one opportunity, one method of developing this. If they stop the fire from growing more, however much they succeed, after that, the fire is going to try to fight them. And the strength will be dependent on the effects of the previous phase. The fire will manifest, right? Fire manifests in multiple forms. What did I do? Why can't I autocorrect here? There we go. In multiple forms. And then with the fire weakened / defeated over potentially a couple phases of battle, of combat in different formats, then the players can capture the fire. How? Well, maybe the players have a gourd or special object they've acquired elsewhere. I mean, just popped. That they've acquired elsewhere or been given prior to the start of the adventure. If they've been hired or something, that they're going to be given something important to do this. So it doesn't really matter. We're going to assume that before this sequence begins, the players have what they need, right, to do this, to capture the fire. That's our starting point. All right, player goals. Boom. We've talked about that. Let's talk environment. So, environment. And hopefully, as you're watching this gives you a very clear breakdown. It's nothing fancy. It's just brainstorming and allowing yourself to have crappy ideas and then move through them and get to better ideas. It's exactly like writing. You just have to be willing to take the time to go through it and allow yourself to have ideas that are less than stellar. Okay, the environment, the forge. This is the key piece, right? The forge is our starting setting. This is really how it's going to shift. I think we've talked a little bit about it already. Weapons and armor on the wall, coming off to attack and cause trouble. We also have potentially fire breaking through the walls / floor / ceiling, magma everywhere. That's going to be causing problems. I think those are cool, different ways for the environment to play in. If I knew more about blacksmithing, I feel like I could come up with some interesting stuff. And so I think this is where, we want to have blacksmith research. Woo, blacksmith research. We're gonna talk this out. We'll see what happens with this. But blacksmith research, figure out a way to better integrate blacksmithing tools or process into this encounter / sequence. Leaving the specifics out, we're just going to keep rolling for now. All right, so that's the environment. Next, we need to talk about monster abilities. Now, we have a really fun monster here, a really cool one. Ultimately, the HP of the monster is the overall integrity of the fire, right? HP is the integrity / strength of the fire. But as I spoke about in the first video, you don't have to set 1 HP that you carry through the phases. One of the cool advantages of an epic fight is that you don't get that sometimes really unfortunate, crappy thing of your players one-shotting your villain. And like I said, it's not about gamesmanship. It's not about just being better than your players and beating them at their own game, quote unquote. It's about giving them a satisfying experience. If you have this really cool battle and they just one-shot the hero because of a lucky, rogue, crit, sneak attack, insanity, that's just, I think, usually, bad design. It can be super fun. Don't get me wrong. It can be a ton of fun for the players and even for you. It can be funny. But I don't think it's more fun than a really satisfying, well-done combat encounter. So rather than just having 1 HP, you can have HP per phases. It's kind of narrative, right? And like I said, we're not going to go deep into the stats this time. We're just going through the sequencing of events and trying to figure out how best to do that. My computer's overheating. Oh. There we go. All right. So, geez, I know sometime I'll do this not on a laptop when I actually have better equipment. HP is the integrity / strength of the fire. What are the cool aspects of fire? Because that's really where I'm starting from. We can look at fire elementals and things like that too from the book. We'll consider that. Look at their abilities. Fire monsters. That could be fun. Dwarven abilities. All things to look at. But fire, if we're starting from there, what would be cool for fire to do, regardless if it's in the book or not? And even an established monster, if you have something you think of as super cool, it's not that every monster is going to get that ability. This is for an epic battle. Give them something extra. Give them something special about them that'll make players stop for a second and remember something really sweet that they're able to do. So, fire can split, right, into multiples, or it can reunite into a stronger form. Love this idea. I think that could be super fun. Maybe a little hard to manage, but still really interesting. Fire can consume. It grows stronger / replenishes health as it consumes, which potentially could be a better. Oh, hello. Potentially, this could be a better way to do this, right? The idea could be, instead of having these shipments, where was that? Instead of having these shipments of coal deliveries, we could have the monster actually going and trying to do it themselves. So instead of deliveries, perhaps the monster goes and consumes the stores itself. The players need to close these vaults, remove access to the supplies. I think this reduces some of the complexity and makes it kind of a little bit more clear because they see the monster heading for it. And after the first one, if they don't get the idea beforehand, if they don't connect the dots in their head when you're describing the situation, they'll see the monster consume the coal and grow, which is true of the first one too. But regardless, two different options here. Fire can split, fire can consume, fire can burn, right? Fire can burn. Lasting damage over time on players, lighting people on fire. If you haven't tried it as a DM, it's super fun, super dangerous. Forces players to use actions to put themselves out or risk extra damage to accomplish their goals. Love forcing them into this kind of decision making where there's not really a right answer. It's either you take the risk and take some extra damage from staying lit, or you take your action to put yourself out. I think that's really interesting. Fire can split, can consume, it can burn. What else? What else do we want to do? Now, I'm not sure. I think that's okay on fire abilities. I like, obviously we want to have some AoE, maybe a ray ability, something like that. Could be interesting. I don't think we need to go much deeper here because at this point now I'm thinking very purely mechanically and tactically. And I like personally designing encounters that are more narrative, like I keep saying, it's my buzzword, rather than just tactical trying to beat the players. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to move on from this. I'm going to pull these elements up here because this is really the last stuff that we need to talk about. All right. For now, if we look at what we've got so far in the ideas and things like that, most of everything is really being resolved with combat, which is exactly not what we want to have happen, right? If you've got people carting coal in or something like that, you need to take them out with combat by destroying them. That's not super interesting. Skill challenges, maybe we could replace that with skill challenges. Skill challenges, I think this is cool. What are the combat elements, right? Fighting the Fire Lord, fighting primordial fire, minions, animated weaponry / servants. What about for the skill challenges? I think closing the vault doors on the coal. This could be a cool, interesting way to do this. Closing the vault doors on the coal. Nice. This would just probably be something simple. Athletics, checks. Yeah, an athletic check. Try to close the door. Easier with multiple. But what about puzzles? So layer actions. I think the environmental, either the animated weaponry, animated weaponry, or magma-izing of the forge could be a cool environmental layer action. Personally, also, and let me just check something here off screen. All right. Personally, also, besides that, we could do some other fun layer action things, like what? I don't know. If we look at everything that we've got, I think that's okay. We've got two big layer actions, got one very simple skill challenge. I'd love for it to be something that wasn't athletics based, or at least to have multiple ways of being solved. But I may have to come back to this. Boy, streaming is hard. You got to think of everything on the spot. No breaks. Crazy. All right. puzzle, puzzle, puzzle solution. What could be a cool puzzle solution? Something with the hearths, maybe. The hearths, jumping from one to the other. For now, the coolest thing I think we've got, Fire Lord combat, sweet. The vault doors, having something that'll impact the strength of the fire further on, also very cool. I'd love to have more narrative impact to the choices that the players make, to the ways that they decide to resolve things. There's a lot potentially, I think, around treasure, right? If they decide to destroy more of the forge, maybe there's less they have access to. If they save more of the vault doors, they might get access to what's in there later. Potentially some interesting things that can be done there. But look, I mean, how long have we been at this for? We haven't been at this for long at all, and we've already got a very, very sizable outline. We've got a full-on, like vision, a full-on, 40 minutes, something like that. Yeah, and we've already got a very long, detailed design idea. If I were doing this on my own, I'd probably take a break at this point. I don't think I'd keep going. I have a bunch. I'd step away, go take a walk, grab some water, do something else, and then come back to it, reorganize these notes, and then move on. But I'm here with you. What we want now is to try to build this out and just put this into sequence. Figure out how are we going to go through. So let's take a look at our key design notes again and see if that jogs anything. We know that the fire is sentient. That's really key. And having the surprise element, I think, is really fun. Playing off the Dwarven Forge, also really cool. Because of that, I don't want to go with the coal deliveries. Having these vaults will add to the setting of the Dwarven Forge. So I'm going to stick with the idea of the vaults. Animating objects and items, cool. I think that's really fun, and we'll stay with that. Maybe. The elements of the forge itself. Yeah. All right. We're just going to start plotting it out and see what happens. I think that the idea of the Fire Lord at the end will stick. We're going to throw... This obviously doesn't need a connection to the end. Ending. Beginning. All right. Ending is simple. We did it. Players capture the fire. This could be also a compelling and difficult check. Essentially, you need to grapple with the primordial core, something like that. Grapple with the primordial core and seal it into the object/device players have been provided with. The difficulty being, each attempt you make, you take damage. All right. That's a start. Let's bold these. Sometimes the aesthetics really just get you, you know? I've got some dramatic music playing in my headphones right now. All right. So, and at the start, we're going to have the investigation of the forge. I'm not going to plot out anything that happens before because that's building an adventure. Maybe we'll turn this into a deeper adventure, something like actually written out and built out so you can see what the end product might look like, how I would potentially run it in my home game, and with a little bit more detail. So you could try running it if you think it's interesting, whether it's theater of the mind or with, minis and all of that. So we're going to do the investigation of the forge, players capturing the fire. We're going to end with the Fire Lord. Fire Lord, I think having an awesome, epic battle at the end is fun. It's a lot of what players want usually, and this will be such a sweet, the Iron Golem / Shield Golem. We'll go Iron Golem. Iron Golem body, big two-hander, big one-hander, magic in the offhand. these don't really mean anything, right? Like in big D&D terms, not a huge deal. Just giving myself some ideas and some reference of what it looks like, what it will feel like. I want to get this combination of this, Iron Golem's body swinging this massive thing around, but also the primordial elemental using its flame abilities to conjure fire and cause spell damage to people, have magical damage to people. So that's cool. We could have like other runestones, if we have one primordial firestone that's kind of corrupted the others, perhaps there's other ones, and that's kind of what they're trying to do. So I'll throw that in the ideas. Hearth phase. Other runestones? Primordial fire. Subservient fires. Subservient fires. All right. The Fire Lord is our phase 3. All right, now we only need 2 ideas. We need 2 big phases that'll be satisfying and 1 connection or cutscene. Here, it's definitely got to be something that ties in. I think this will be fun. Remember, the cutscene, this is just like a skill challenge, a quick one, or just one saving throw, layer action type thing that'll, tie the 2 scenes together. Gives yourself a little bit of narrative space, and keeps the whole encounter feeling cohesive, the whole sequence. All right. So I like the vaults. The vaults are cool. Super fun idea. Closing them off. Do I like the vaults? I do like the vaults. I like the vaults. I need to learn to think out loud when I'm doing this. I like the vaults. Here's the issue. Coal is super mundane. Coal, it's really just, coal. And if it's the fire going and consuming, that means either the fire is already standing or we go back to this delivery idea, which feels complicated, would be really hard to run theater of the mind. I'm not a huge fan of. However, this hearths idea, if we go with the runestone thing, and it's not about the fire moving around, it's more about these runestones being activated and taken over. Now this, I think, could work. So let's go with the runestones. And what you're trying to do is prevent activation. And I don't know why I said runestones, because I've been thinking primordial fire, but that gives us like a physical object, right? At the core of the fire is a runestone. So that makes sense. At the core of the fire is a dwarven runestone. This is the treasure. So we have these minor runestones, prevent activation, that are around the forge. And these runestones, there's 2 things we need to, one thing we need to figure out, 2 options. Either they're already in place, already activated, and it's up to the players to turn them off, or some subservient force is trying to activate them, and it's up to the players to stop them. If it's prevent activation, that means it's breaking the runestones, I think. I think that's what's cool. Because if they don't break them, combat is harder, but they get a bigger reward at the end. If they do, well, combat's easier, but they have less of a reward. Now, if it's not about preventing their activation necessarily, it could be... Oh, here's an idea. Forgetting the other second option. If it's not about preventing the activation, maybe it's about controlling the heat. We think back to these dwarves, and they're forging in this ancient dwarven workshop. And when they've been working here, they've got this primordial flame that's extremely powerful. How do they keep it in control? Well, we know they have these primordial fire runestones. What if this is a particular treasure, it's special, but they might have smaller water runestones? And these are the things that need to be put in place to essentially control the size of the fire, limit its flow, limit its connection to maybe deep volcanoes underneath. And all this, I think this is really cool. So water runestones, or break the connection with heat geysers. With geysers, that's water, right? Geysers with magma vents, or deep underground volcanoes to weaken it. It's almost like the pipes, like breaking or stopping the pipes. Skill challenge. And now all of a sudden we had this vault thing, and so there could be a few ways. Either you force it closed with physical strength, and that's athletics, or you could pick the mechanism. Skullduggery, sleight of hand. Getting my Star Wars mixed up. Skullduggery, sleight of hand, doesn't matter. Sleight of hand, lockpicking, one or the other. Thieves' tools. Pick the mechanism, or attune to the arcane mechanism, right? The arcane like signal that dwarves use, that like they would just connect to, and they could will it shut, will it open. That's awesome. And that would be Arcana. And now we're catering broadly, at least. We're catering broadly to the three different elements. And I would even allow it to be religion, right? Religion, something like that, or just an action for a dwarven player. Or dwarven language. Action of speaking dwarven language. There could be like a dwarven, religion, because of religious magic, potentially, if it's like Moradin or something like that. This might go here. Religion, if dwarven god or craft god / Moradin specifically. And I think like having either the dwarven language or primordial, that would be cool. They would know, they would be able to either intuit or just read, written on the wall somewhere, command word to shut down each valve, essentially. And boom, now we've got a really fun skill challenge. And we're moving backwards. I think it's helpful sometimes in plotting to move backwards. The Fire Lord, this is just a standard combat encounter. Standard combat encounter. Here, the runestones controlling the heat, we've essentially got a ticking time bomb. X number of turns until all activated, and fire swells, right? So they need to close it. This is fun. It's a skill challenge. All of a sudden, it's a different kind of counter. Depending on how well they do here, the Fire Lord's going to have a different level of ability. And finally, back to phase 1, the runestone, it's swelling. It's doing this because it feels threatened, right? We established the fire feels threatened, so it's triggering all these... no, we're trying to control the heat. So, sorry, this confused me. We're going to remove this. Let's see. Let's just strike through. Where is that? Oh my god, I can't even use strike through. Strike through. Strike. Yeah, all right, great. We're trying to control the heat. How do the players know to do this? We've got to make this super clear. This goes here, right? Make the connection with valves clear. This is where we communicate what the players have to do in phase 2. So we need to narratively describe, hey, look, this is what's happening. And as these are flowing, you see the fire growing stronger in the center. Whatever you try right now, it's not helping. Any attacks that they try, give them like a free action each player. Whatever they try, having no effect on the central fire. Instead, it's just swelling and growing, and you need to stop the momentum. You need to throw these runestones down. So it's not a ticking time bomb. It's the opposite. It's the greater number of turns you take to activate everything, the stronger it gets. And we'll refine this. We'll see how exactly we think this should play out and what it should look like. You could do it by time. You could do it by number of turns, right? If they don't do everything in 5 minutes, it's this strong. Well, whatever the case, however you want to do it, we'll figure it out. So this is where we establish what happens in phase 2, and then we kind of move on. We have the rune stones, and now we get the surge of fire / formation of Fire Lord. All right, I think here for the surge of fire, just like a quick burst, AOE burst of fire. I think that's all that's really necessary. Again, fire usually comes with a dex save. Doesn't have to be too difficult, but can be quite strong. It's, this idea of, all right, the fire has been surging in the central vault, and it's building up strength and building up strength and building up strength, and then boom, it all explodes out. Everybody ducks and dodges and tries to get out of the way. Maybe they suffer some damage. Maybe they manage to avoid it. But when the fire and smoke clears and all the players, their characters, they look up inside the forge, and now looming overhead is this body, golem-sized body of an armored primordial fire elemental threatening them. I think that's pretty badass. And if they defeat it, then they can capture the fire and loot the forge. Come back. All right. Back to where we were. Make the connections with the valve clear. How do we get the fire to be threatened? Right? This is where the players threaten the fire. The fire has been inside, and I think simply enough, the fire is sentient. However, how intelligent is it really? I don't know. I have not decided. If we go back through our ideas, there's a lot that we could integrate. The Fire Lord phase is in here. We can strike through that. Boy, I wish I knew where that strike through was. Ooh. Nope. All right. Where was it? Why isn't it just in here? All right. Strike. Why isn't it anywhere? All right. Command Shift X. Okay. Command Shift X. Command Shift X. Great. The Hearth phase, we turned that into the kind of Runestone phase. All right. We could either take these minor fire elementals or the animated weapons or animated armor. Now, based off our key design, I want the Forge to play a greater role. Having the animated weapons around, I think, is just too freaking cool. Animated weapons lit on fire. And honestly, I think it works kind of well with the animated armor as well. So, phase 1 will once more be a combat phase. And what I like now, compared to where we were thinking before, if we look back at the player goals, is that we had Fight the Fire, and we had 2 phases right in a row. As cool as that can be, and as cool as the escalation can be, I like having combat be resolvable through other options. So, here's what we do. We're going to have now, if Fight the Fire is broken up twice, right? So we have Stop the Fire from growing more. That's when they're going to put those runestones in, or whatever the case is. Control its growth. And then Fight the Fire before and after. And here, we're going to have the fire reacts. Animated attacks. Animated attacks. The Forge lives! It's alive! This is when our animated armor that bursts into fire and animated weapons do extra fire damage come into play. And we could show this. I think having the animated armor showing this is great. We could use a timer, like a D4. Roll a D4. That's the number of turns before it bursts. And the D4, at the end of the D4, it'll burst. And we could say / describe the armor growing redder and the heat building up around it. When you're creating custom mechanics, like, for example, this idea of as the armor, is attacking, eventually it's going to explode and shatter and do some nasty damage to anyone around who doesn't make the save. When you're creating these kind of mechanics, players can sometimes feel cheated. If they know the rules, if they know the enemies, they don't like being caught off guard. A lot of them, not everybody, but a lot of players, don't like being caught off guard by things that they don't know. The best way to balance this out, and to be fair as a DM, because your goal isn't to beat the players, but to create a compelling narrative experience, is to describe what they would actually be feeling. The fire wouldn't just suddenly explode. That's kind of weird. It would build up. right? It would grow warmer. You would see maybe the metal on the armor starting to melt and cave in and growing red and glowing hot. And so you could describe, if there's a character in melee combat, what they see. You're feeling the searing heat, right, coming off of it. You're seeing what's happening to this armor if you're in visual range and line of sight of it. And then when you finally say that it explodes and you keep describing it turn after turn, they're going to get the idea that something's wrong. And so when you finally have it explode, it's going to feel justified. It's going to feel fair. It's going to feel like the playing ground has been level and that you're not trying to pull one over on your players, but that you're working with them fairly. And here, this is when, right, we're going to assume this is when the fire is watching, and we're assuming that the players are going to try to catch the fire. They want the fire. They're there to get it. So they're going to try to get it. And when they do, that's when the fire is going to pull away. Or they might capture some small wisp of it and not realize that, hey, this isn't the actual fire, or this isn't the main source of it. And now the fire, having seen this kind of having seen what the players are doing, is going to have this instinctual fight or flight response. And it's fire. It's not going to fly away. It's going to fight. It's going to activate all the animated things around to defend itself. And the best way we show this is first with the torches being lit by the fire, and then spawning the animations. So we do still need probably a connection cutscene phase. And we can go through here and look at this design document. We have 3 pages now of ideas, 4 pages? Wow, 4 pages of design ideas, possibilities of what this could all really look like that we can go back and pull. And really, we haven't integrated that much yet. We could pull any of these concepts later on and bring them back into it, right? If we look at the monster abilities, we haven't done fire elementals of it splitting or turning into multiples or things like that. We haven't done it consuming and replenishing health. We don't have to do everything, right? We don't want it to be overly complex, but there's a lot that we could do. We just haven't done everything yet. So now it's just a matter of kind of cleaning this up and bringing it together. I think what I potentially might do is have initially like the fire floating around. It's floating around, and it's like a curious animal. It doesn't speak. It can understand primordial, kind of like the owls, right? The owls, the giant owls in D&D, they understand Sylvan, but they don't speak it back. So, like giant owl. And it's like a curious animal. It wants to see what it's talking to it. Maybe the players can trick it, can trap it. If they speak primordial, the fire coax it into come a little closer, and then boom, snare it with whatever device that they have, right? It's this floating... It's like a ghastly. It's like a ghastly. It's a floating core with fire around it, like a torch with no legs, with no torch, essentially, just the floating fire. And the key now is the reveal after this that this was just one small piece of the fire. So this is not a super detailed breakdown. However, this pretty much gives you, I think, I would be able to run off of this everything I would need. I would maybe only, here, let's go through it just so I can talk this out. We've got the combat sequence. I know what happens at the start. I know I've got this forge, giant workshop, etc. If I cleaned up my notes, I would have some like bullet points in there of what it is, and I'd be able to describe it, know that the players are coming to it, throw it into anything as long as I've given them what they need beforehand to capture this thing and have created an opportunity for them to go there if they're traveling through the Underdark, right? If you're doing Undermountain, there's no reason you couldn't have something like this set up. So I know what's happening in the beginning. I know how the fire is going to act up front. And I know that I'm the DM, right? You're kind of, you know what the players are going to do to a degree. You don't necessarily know how they're going to do it, but if you tell them, hey, you need to capture this fire, in this case, they're probably going to try to capture the fire. If they don't, they don't, right? You're not going to force the encounter. If they walk away and say, this is, sacred and we're not going to upset the elements, then if they walk away, all right, look, you can't control against that. But most of the time, there's a suspension of disbelief or a willingness to collaborate between players who know that they're kind of doing what the DM set them up for and are going to do it anyways because they're playing the game. They're playing the game and they've already agreed to the quest, regardless. The chances are higher that they're going to do what they've already set out to do. So when they try that, I know that somehow then I reveal this larger fire. From off screen, quote unquote, they see a fire leaping from torch to torch lighting. And when it comes back around, it hits the central forge and a large flame ignites. And they can feel it looking at them, almost intelligently. It's this kind of sixth sense that you can just, describe, doesn't have to mean anything, of them being aware that this is a sentient being. And now it feels under attack. And so it lights the animated armor, it lights the weapons. Now you have a combat encounter. Animated armor going to be a little bit tougher. Animated weapons going to be probably one hit, goes down no matter what. As long as they manage to hit them, they're going to be zooming around. I'd probably want to stat these out beforehand. Wouldn't be too difficult. I could use the stats in the books for animated armor and things like that. Animated weapons, you just take the weapon stat block and add maybe a d6 fire or more, depending on how strong you want this fire to be and the level your players are playing at. But I could do this without it. If you know these stats, if you know the animated armor stats, or just pull this up really quickly. That's not a lot of prep scene. Once they've destroyed the armor and weapons, which are all like nice but old dwarven weaponry and dwarven armor, then you have all these kind of pipes activate. The fire has been kind of biding its time, preparing, and now it's tapping into this connection underground to fuel itself and grow stronger. Or maybe these pipes have already been activated, right? If you set that up beforehand, but now you can feel them really flowing. They're going at full strength. And the players can see the valves feeding the fire. Now, ideally, I'd want to have some sort of interactive element here. However, it's not 100% necessary because it's so important that the valves are clear. I don't want to distract the players with something for them to do when really they just need to understand these valves are going and they need to turn them off. Maybe this is when I start spawning fire elementals, right? And little sprites. And it's essentially just firebolts, randomized firebolts that start firing at players. I think that's fun. And it keeps it with our phase of the fire burst later. So firebolts at individual players. Randomized, multiples. Don't know how exactly. Just a firebolt spell or array or something. There's essentially, oh, look, I just thought of a cool thing. Now it's a puzzle, right? It's a puzzle or a sequence of trap sequence with rays of fire, firebolts, other small fire spells. And the players need to try to get closer. And as they do, they see these valves growing and feeding it. And you can just straight up say, you need to shut off these valves. You know that the longer these pump into the fire, the stronger the fire gets. And the stronger its abilities are going to get, and the harder it's going to be to capture, right? Don't give away what's happening with it. That's going to transform or anything like that. But you can set it up about this well, and then, they'll do it. They'll know that there's a problem with the fire and that they don't want it to get stronger. When they start looking into it, and they say, all right, I'm going to try to turn it off. Then you can give them the description of here's what you see. You see this dwarven activation kind of rune that's here. And it's clearly connected to some sort of mechanism within each of these valves. They could try, it's up to them to figure out how they try to close it. I'm not a real fan usually of telling, of saying something like, here's the problem, you need to make this check to fix it. I much prefer saying, here's what you see and describing it thoroughly, and then allowing the player to be creative in the solution they come up with. And saying, can I try to force it closed? And then you can just say, you can try. And if they say, all right, then you say, make an athletics check. Obviously, I'll want to set the DC for these. depending on what I decide and how what the levels and the proficiency bonuses that people are usually playing with, you could set them all to be the same. You could set them all to be a little different. It could be DC 15. It could be, maybe DC 17 for this, 16 because it's just particularly tougher. This could be as well, DC 16. Maybe I make them all 16 if I want them to be equal. Don't want to favor anyone. The action of speaking the Dwarven language. This would require a good perception check to notice it, right? If someone says, do I notice anything else? This is when you say, oh yeah, there's a rune up there on the wall. 2 runes, one next to each other, one written in both written in Dwarven script. One seems to be Dwarven and the other Primordial, from what you can tell. It's like recognizing, oh, that's probably German, or oh, that's probably Arabic, that kind of thing. You can recognize it. And then if someone can read it, you can go have them read it, and they can then use one word to shut off the valve. And it's essentially trading an action that way. And I might want to increase the cost of this, regardless of how great this skill challenge is or how you want to play with it. I've got enough here that I can edit it on the fly based off what I see my players are doing. I know that the goal is for them to shut off the valves. I've got 4 different ways that they can do that, and a really clear indication that will give them the clue that they need of this is what you need to achieve to move to the next phase. Once they've done this, I'll be keeping track of how long this is going for. And I think in this case, I'm going to be keeping track of something like number of turns, like rounds, right? Number of rounds. 1 round is fastest. That means there's, no noticeable effect on the monster. Really simple way is create the stat block as a basic ability. Instead of saying that this is going to weaken the monster in phase 3, make the monster in phase 3 as weak as possible and have the rounds grant the monster extra strength, like temporary HP, things like that. Very simple version is every round past the first is 1d10 bonus HP and 1d4 extra damage. That can be pretty nasty. And it might be like, it might be in 1d6 extra damage as inspiration. Monster chooses, right? You choose. Yay for being a DM. You get to choose when to spend that extra damage. And now all of a sudden the monster's gotten stronger and you've done it for every round. And so if 3 rounds go by, which is unlikely, but if it takes them 4 rounds to close all 4 valves, let's say, right? Water runestones on valves connected to volcanoes. It's 4 total. If it's 4 rounds, it's going to get 40-10 bonus HP or 1d6 extra damage, and you can modify this. You'll know once you stat it out. That's really the biggest thing, is then statting out the Fire Lord, which we'll talk about. Potentially, you could have oops kind of moments where if they try to break off the valve with a weapon, which, always possible, or they force it closed with physical strength and roll a natural 1, you could potentially give them, hey, you do close it, or hey, you do break the valve, but now there's magma spilling out and slowly filling up the room. You messed up. You caused a problem. I don't think it's going to ruin or derail the encounter. Instead, now you just have this slowly growing pool of magma that causes an environmental problem, probably gives that person some immediate extra damage, and, it's something that they're going to have to address. So, cool possibilities. Again, I'm just coming up with this on the fly. I trust myself now as a DM, and I think you got to learn to trust yourself as a DM to be able to improvise, to have a basic premise, and then to be able to build off of it as you go and as you're actually running the scene. Finally, when they've done this, there's a Surge of Fire, AoE Burst of Fire, Dex save. Again, 3d10 fire damage, Dex save 14. It doesn't matter. Hopefully, if you're running for your players, you're going to know what level they're at. You're going to know how able they are and what saves they're good and bad at. You're going to be the best person to set a difficulty for this. And because I'm just trying to show you, I want to leave it open for you. to set it for whatever is appropriate for your party, or for a one-shot, or something like that. And finally, the Fire Lord, right? Now this leads into that cinematic explanation I gave kind of earlier of, hey, the Fire Lord forms the Iron Golem body, and you have a standard combat encounter. And they need to break it and destroy it, and, the armor will clink to the ground. Maybe the one-hander is magical, and a cool thing to get at the end. Or the armor is magical. Fire resistance, right? If it's this magma golem, this like, fire elemental wearing this armor's probably got some good fire resistance to it. Depending on the level, maybe even fire immunity if you want to get real wild. So that could be a cool thing to get that's appropriate to the setting. Fire resistance or immunity. Something like that. A helm. I don't know, blacksmith weapons or tools. Right? Those are all treasure that you can integrate and get in and provide to your players for doing well or doing poorly. And if they defeat the Fire Lord, if they don't defeat the Fire Lord, well, either they're going to go away, in which case they can maybe come back later. And by that point, if the room fills up with magma, probably not going to have an easy time capturing a fire elemental if that magma just keeps flowing in. If they haven't broken it that way, they can come back later. Maybe they can try again. I would recommend, obviously, the situations. You should change the situation by then. Or, they're just defeated and they all die TPK here with the Fire Lord. I mean, well, we talked about this. Ragnaros is freaking epic. Look at this guy. TPK against Ragnaros, I mean, that's not too bad. And look at the scale, right? That's one thing we didn't talk about. Scale could be whatever you want it to. It could be a smaller workshop and this fire elemental is like just twice their height. Or it could be like this, where, his head is bigger than a single person. And so this dwarven forge is actually a big, giant room with forges on 4 sides. And the players are running around and there's like, catwalks essentially like between going to this central fire. And this is where the Fire Lord is. Man, I think this is super cool. I'm excited. I want to run this now. At this scale, I think it's awesome. Anyways, you can do the volcano thing, whatever you want. You do the Fire Lord. Hopefully they defeat it. Then they capture the fire. They have to make some sort of grapple attempt. Again, it's another skill challenge. I like team skill challenges. Team skill challenges where you need to reach a number of successes before X number of failures. Really simple way to do it is that you need one less number of successes as there are players. I need to... Well, I'll do it later. You need to reach X number of successes. So let's say you have 5 players. You need 4 successes before 3 failures. Stakes are high. If you hit 3 failures, Fire Lord gets away. Maybe there's a consolation prize. You only get, one of the other... maybe stones or something around there, other treasure, or at 3 failures, here's a different way, you still succeed, but take boatloads of damage. And that's another way to do it. That's another way where, it's just a consequence. They've done the hard thing. They've defeated the Fire Lord. So you're not going to cheat them. You're just going to give them a kind of consequence to go along with their success. And if they have 4 successes, they get it, no damage. And now they've done it. Each attempt they take damage to start, maybe, something like that. But you've got everything you need. You've really got everything you need here. It's very loose. It doesn't have to be super deep. I think you have everything you need to run this encounter to make it interesting. And from everything we wrote down, if there are things that you would want to do differently, you can edit it. We've got a ton of ideas, and I'm sure you've come up with some of your own as you're watching this, that you could do if you wanted to use the fire monsters or dwarven, dark dwarves or ancient dwarf slaves or things like that, or dwarven ghosts that are still working the forges. Whatever the case may be, you can run this in a really cool, really interesting way. And you have now on your hands an epic monster battle. Right? This is all one combat. From the investigation of the Forge to the Fire Lord, the enemy has remained the same. The enemy is this primordial fire elemental. But the forms that it's taken have changed. The environment will change with the emergence of magma and fire along the course of the combat. And the goals that the players have from phase to phase also change as they respond to the developing situation. Whew, man. Well, that was a lot. That was a fun first stream. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope I wasn't recording, so I hope this all saved. Because if not, I'm going to be super upset. I didn't think about starting recording at the same time as I stopped recording, but I thought that YouTube did that automatically. I guess we'll see. In any case, thanks for watching. I know this is a strange video for me to do, but if you like this, maybe I'll do these more regularly and not in place of my other videos, but in addition to my other videos, now that I kind of have a setup that I can slowly work on and improve. And, yeah, I mean, you got an epic monster battle. The, Dwarven Forge. Dwarven Forge Fire Lord. All right. I think that's where I'm going to leave it off. I'll scroll through one more time, just slowly. You guys can pause screen and take a look at everything. Make sure you have what you need to run it. But I'm excited.